Thank you. Welcome back, everybody. It seemed like a long time. How long has it been? Seemed like too long. I know many of you have engaged in frivolity since the seriousness of your studies, but you understand those days are over. Now it's time to get serious. So, the Tudors. Here's the book again, and you won't want to put it down. This is just so interesting. And it's got pictures, maps, everything you could want, including Queen Elizabeth, right here. The book itself goes, I'd say, about 5 chapters over this period, because it's all 16th century, and then we never forget the springtime when we're going to do the 17th century, and of course the Stuarts, because we have quite a bit to do in these 2 terms, because of course the Tudors and the Stuarts, and I imagine there are very few periods, if any, that are more covered by, what shall we say, regular people outside. I'll have to admit, as a medievalist, it's hurtful to think this is more popular than my crowd, but it is true. Not like Frank's period, World War II, but we can't compete on the 20th century level. But I would say Tudors and Stuarts, how many series have we watched? And all that. In other words, it's nice for the buffs among us, as we call people who like history but don't want to have to do a PhD. I get it. I understand. I respect your lack of wanting to stick the whole way out. But it is a fascinating period. I have to tell you that the last day of 2025 for the class, we did Henry VII. And you remember that, Lee? Remember that? Yeah. I'm glad the recall, that's good. Very good. Okay. Your mind is like a Hoover vacuum cleaner bag. It's got it all stashed away up there so that if it's on the final, you'd get all this right. And you will know Bosworth Field backward and forward. Well, I know you would, but everybody, because of the dates of a certain person who knows dates, she can recite them up and down. All of this means that I start with a sort of review. Yeah. She knows from 1485 onward, 1453, her mind is just, it's like a body accompanying the mind. It's all, huge. What have I done wrong?
It's Tracy.
There we go.
Just that one.
That's what I did. But so this is all just review, because, and it'll all come back, I promise, because you learned it so well before. And then the holidays came and distracted you, I realized, from learning. But you do remember Richard III, who could forget it? We all know it from Shakespeare. So everyone knows that, and we remember, of course, the convenient marriage of Henry VII to his lovely bride, Elizabeth, who happened to be related to the king, who was unceremoniously unseated, Richard III. The marriage of Henry VII to Elizabeth must have been a love match because it lasted a very long time until they were parted by death. And as far as we're aware, Henry VII never cheated, which has got to go down in terms of major accomplishment. Yeah. Because that's highly unusual. All of this is to say that it doesn't mean that there weren't some heads that rolled and some unpleasantry occurred as relations of the Yorkists, Richard III, would try to reclaim that throne. And the ugliness of usurpation, people trying to get it back. And what's so important about that for us is the fact that if you are a Tudor, you're going to have to toss and turn sometimes at night, thinking, I know I have enemies. I know people don't like me. And I hope that I survive this. So, all of that, of course, means that he had an interest in making sure that he would have a nice situation to pass on to little Arthur. We learned to love Arthur last term because he was such a nice kid. Everybody liked him. I've never heard anything bad about Arthur. Maybe that's because he died young. That helps. Yeah. I know, isn't that awful? But it's like those of us who are long livers, we have a longer track record, so that get in trouble a lot. But actually, Arthur was married for political reasons, but they seem to be a happy young couple. He and the younger daughter of Ferdinand Isabella of founding of America fame, 1492 for the uninitiated. I know, they need to be more like you. But all of this is to say that it was cut short by his unfortunate demise, and that would change the plans. You know, the odd thing is, one time, I don't know why, I just happened to notice in Canterbury Cathedral a memorial. You know, it's one of those moments when you're walking as a tourist, and I'm walking through Canterbury, and suddenly I came across a place that Henry VII had set up for his son Arthur, for masses to be provided. You know, back in the old church, the idea was the more masses, the better for the soul in purgatory. So that was the idea. And then I started thinking about how he and Elizabeth must have felt about the death of Arthur. And so it's like we make these donations because he was such a wonderful son. But all of that is significant because, of course, the young Arthur is now going to leave a young widow, Catherine of Aragon, who is still working on her English, you know, intro to English, which is, I mean, very strange to think about, but it's very true. And of course, being the daughter of Isabella, she was serious about her Catholic religion. And not to say that Arthur wasn't also, but I'm assuming she was in a very strange position at that time. She was quite young. And so her parents had to make some decision about her because one assumed she came with a rather large dowry. And you have to think about refunds. I know. That is so ugly, kind of tacky, isn't it? To think, it's like we're consumed with grief. Well, not that much. We get over it, and we want that refund on that dowry. And the Spanish already had a lot, but they wanted presumably to get it back. Ferdinand, though, had other ideas, and the reason was because of this little fella. Yes, I know you're thinking of gout and diabetes and all kinds of terrible things to come, but we're all cute at that point. Remember that. We all have good memories and think, golly. I always say that's why we have Olin Mills. So, you can always get them to pay to make you look good. Yeah. In this case, that's young Henry, the younger son. Of all the children, and people back then did like to procreate. And so there were some pregnancies that resulted in miscarriages and whatnot. But in essence, after the death of Arthur, there were 3 children, as we all know from the various television series, I'm sure. And of course, the other 2 being females will be married off. And you think, gosh, was that just a matter of love? No, I think it had to do with being political interest. One became Queen of Scotland, and the other became Queen of France. You say, wow, Queen of France, that sounds wonderful. Well, I don't know. When you think maybe there's a 30-year age gap, you're thinking, wow, I can't wait to meet him. We'll have a lot in common. No, I don't think so. This is Louis. This is Louis XII. And luckily for Mary, I hate to say this, he won't live too long. So she'd go back home and marry her boyfriend. But that's another story. This is the only male survivor. And he now will follow his father. And, you don't know a lot about Henry as a child, a young man, but it must have been very weird to be successor when he had grown up not expecting it. There he is at 19. And you say, 19? That's young. Well, it may be, but he had been king for 2 years by then. Can you believe it? Yeah, that's about the time his parents had died. First his mother, then his father. And so he becomes king. And this is must have been a very difficult situation. I just thought it was a nice picture. Pre-gout, pre-diabetes. Yeah, I mean, healthy. He was not strictly dieting like he should have. Yeah. But this is the time of life for him, and he had, I guess, up until that point, a lot of fun. Studied hard. He knew Latin and French, and as well as English. Learned some Italian. literature. He had lots of tutors. He may have been intended to go into the church. Just guessing, speculation on my part. But that was when he was number 2. Remember that all after Arthur's death. All of that, the idea being, going into the church would be out of question. But he was certainly well educated. Let nobody think about him as wine, women, and song, but he definitely was very well educated in terms of people of that particular rank. Now, here it is. He had a number of titles before he became king. And remember, let's say he's only a teenager, as we would say today, when he became king. So he had experienced, I guess, great tragedy in terms of losing his brother. And you'll never know exactly what all emotions he felt. One thing that did seem odd, and of course we all know what that is, his brother's widow was there. No, she hadn't gone home. She was there. The role of Catherine of Aragon is very strange at this time. When we think, Aragon's beautiful. We would all love that. But Henry and Elizabeth, I guess they don't know what they do with their daughter-in-law, because I'm not sure. We don't love money. We love the wonderful things it can do, just like Harold said on the film. But I'm thinking they don't want to give up that dowry. So they keep her there in England on ice. And Ferdinand and Isabella, they're not saying, come on home, honey, anytime. You know, it's a very strange business. When the decision is made, ultimately, for a marriage between Henry and Catherine of Aragon. I'm not sure Henry was ready for this, because there was a fairly significant age difference, 5 or 6 years. And when you are a teen and there is some, I guess you would say, former sister-in-law who's got 5 or 6 years on you, you're going like, gosh, you're getting up there, gal. I think the 25-year-old would be wonderful, but I'm not altogether sure that if I were 17, I would be as excited. So it seems that after he actually became king, he changed his tune. Maybe it was because of the political circumstances, because it was very, very odd how fast it happened. The change, because as long as his parents were alive, he opposed having to marry her. Having to, doesn't that sound terrible? But I'm sure she was tired of taking English lessons. She'd gotten to advanced English, and it's like, if I'm coming home, we need to get on the next trip to Spain. But in the meanwhile, Isabella had died, the queen, and Ferdinand, I suppose, was going to continue the relationship with the English. whatever the case, the marriage did take place. After they dealt with this handsome fellow, now you're saying, gee, where do we have to go to see that? I thought you'd never ask. London, England. And that will be in the National Gallery. No, not the portrait gallery, Jimmy. Just the regular one. I started reading about this. This fascinates me every time I see this. Apparently, some well-to-do Englishman gave this to the National Gallery, maybe in the 19th century. Again, like giving to Ollie. It's just, but I imagine this was a pretty sizable tax deduction, wouldn't you think? Because this is a Raphael original. And so when you're over there, you world travelers, just stop over on your way to Lisbon. I know when you're going to Portugal, just stop off and see it because it's very, very amazing. And you'll say, I didn't realize he had a beard. Well, he did for a time. This, of course, is Julius II, and he had a large estate. Well, God's estate, but he was temporary trustee. Okay. And he had expenses. He had great taste. He loved art. He loved music. And he loved a place I think we all love, Italy. Yeah. Della Rovere was their name. They're from up north. Northern Italy, that is. And, you know, you often say, why is he so interested in this? Well, a number of reasons. We love France, and I know you do, because you think of 44. And I think of the 13th century. We heard it.
42 is good.
Yeah. But for me, it's all about the culture, the Valois, the Capetians, and all the rest. If you mention France to use the second, you know what'll happen? You'll get some ugly words. I mean, as an Italian, there's a lot of, I'll just call it what it is, Francophobia. Yeah. And you say, but who wouldn't love French? Well, I think it has to do with the French, shall we say, visits to Italy. You say, why are they going south like that? And I'll tell you exactly why. They wanted to take as much of it as they could. All of this will affect it, and it tends to affect the foreign policy during this period. So when Julius was not involved in supporting artists like Michelangelo and all the rest, he may be involved in, well, you know, he's called the warrior pope. So he has that reputation, all in the name of the Lord, of course. But all of this was because his family was very concerned about French influence. You say, now, why is that important for the Tudors? Well, I'll tell you why. Because when they came to him with issues of like, you know, we have a problem. You know, we have this very nice widow, sort of a widow, Catherine. She was sort of married to our first son, now dead. So can we kind of fix this so it becomes a non-marriage? And of course, he's going to say, see, yeah. Well, I guess there's a cover charge, not to be cynical. You know, you have to, when you go to City Hall, you got to pay your fees. So, but this nice man, I guess, Julius II arranged for a dispensation. And again, the assertion was made due to testimony by both Catherine of Aragon and her, how could you put this, chaperone or companion, that she and Arthur had never been truly married. So that was the testimony. And presumably under oath, you know, and all of that. And I get Julius II thinking about, you know, the next painting or battle or whatever. He said, sure, fine. Signed off. Come with the notary public. Sign off and say, it's fine. We're all set. And then the marriage goes forth. From that point, meaning the marriage, they seem to have had a good life. You say, gosh, all the hustle and bustle of being a new king, new dad, because Catherine will present him with a daughter, no stranger to you, Mary. And he's busy. He has lots of activities, mostly of the nature of, I guess, what we would call in the collegiate world, extracurricular activities. He liked sports, or he liked reading and studying, like many of you do. So he would spend a lot of time retired into his library and thinking sometimes about theological issues. Because remember, I want to see that little 1517 is coming. And you go, oh my gosh, you mean the 95? See, you did it again. The minute I can't get past, those of you know that date and understand, people are thinking theology and thinking about all of the issues that must have been on his mind. But how much do we know, or how much am I speculating? A lot of the latter, because of the fact that we just don't know. But he seemed to have it all together. I mean, good to be king. And especially when basically you're sort of on automatic pilot, and you say, how can you be that way? Because you got somebody to do all the work. And then you can just basically hang out with the queen and your buds and do as you please. Yes, there were issues dealing with other rulers, but when we do have problems, we have this man to turn to. Known behind his back as the butcher's son, which is rather rude. He did come from a background that would not be considered upper class, although, you know, butchers are good people. I mean, I wish I could butch, you know, cut up the animals and do that. I can't do it. And I mean, there are things that are beyond me, and Lord knows we're glad they do. But the fact is that, like many people of a working background, what did they used to say about the car company? We try harder. Yeah, the car rental. Avis one. Avis. Yeah, thank you. The idea was Wolsey, Thomas Wolsey. He worked his way up, and he was a hard worker. I'm not saying he was perfect by a long shot, but he knew what he was doing. He was very career motivated. Yes, he was somewhat materialistic. He had his faults, but basically older than Henry VIII. What he was someone who could be counted on to run things. You know, it's like it's good to have somebody to do things that you don't want to be bothered with. And if it goes well, you say, well, that's okay. And then if it doesn't go well, you can say, what did you do like that? That was poor Wolsey. I mean, he took a lot. Now he had his own agenda. Don't they say that quite often? You have your own agenda. Sometimes you hear people say he wanted to be Pope. That's an interesting speculation. And I'm thinking in the land of God, Julius II or Leo X, I'm not thinking an Englishman. There'd been one English Pope in history had dubbed it to that point. So I'm not sure that he may have gotten a few votes, you know, first ballot, or, you know, then like, what the hey, I can, you know, throw away my first round ballot. But none of that came to fruition. But, you know, I don't know why I think of Henry Kissinger whenever I think of Cardinal Wolsey, only in the sense that they were master diplomats, very involved, and very useful to take the blame when things don't go right. And then the king, when things go right, can say, I knew you'd do it, just like I wanted it. He lived quite well. The cardinal's position came thanks to Pope Leo X, and I don't think it was given the position of cardinal because of Wolsey's piety or his devotion to Mother Church. I think it was just a payoff to say something nice to Henry. You know, you're a wonderful son. I love you very much. And so how would you like for your man Wolsey to be? Because Wolsey had the honors. Honors meaning income paying honors. Checks coming in. You say, but he's a man of the cloth. Well, but high grade cloth. Yeah. This is not Kmart cloth. This is Brooks Brothers cloth. Yeah, this is really good stuff. And he was living very, very well. And to live well, you need a lot of, as we used to say, cash money. And he had plenty of that, and credit to boot. And it worked very well for a while, and then it didn't. So all of that, of course, has to do with people like this one. Doesn't he look dashing? I just love that the look of Francis at that particular time. Louis XII, remember he was married to Henry's sister when he was older and she was young. Well, he died without a son. That's why he hoped that Mary, Henry's sister, would provide the son. She didn't. So dying without a son, they actually had to reach out and get a cousin to be the new king. He was a Valois. Yeah, so he had the right blood. And that's our Francis here. And Lord Francis, like all of them, just couldn't get enough pasta and spaghetti. Wants to go, you know where? Italy. And you say, don't you have enough to do in France? Yeah, but we want more. Yeah. And of course, that will become very important because Henry, like all the English, remember, some of you will remember all too well when I say 1453. I know. You remember the fall of Bordeaux. I know, I'm with you. I know you're suffering. It was sad when you lost Bordeaux. And you say, did we give it up and say, oh yeah? And then, no, we want it back. And we want more. What do we want? All of it. Normandy. Don't we want Normandy? Yeah. Yeah. All of that means that Henry and Francis had a strange relationship. It's like they're both young, they're both adventurous, and I'm sure that Wolsey had his side relationship with Francis, and Wolsey was always trying to play one off against another. Whatever the case, we bear that in mind, the relationship between England and France in that period. But this is particularly interesting where you see that, and some of you have heard of this cloth of gold meeting, which is like more than a long weekend. I think this was maybe 2 weeks. I know, games and festivities. I think Catherine went too with Henry because they're like, gosh, it's almost like something out of the Olympics. It's like we have these relays and they're probably having little fights and all kinds of activities with these 2 young kings. And guess where it was? Only a few miles from a place we all love, Calais. And guess what? We still have Calais. Because this is the reign of Henry. We're not going to lose Calais for a while. It's coming to a classroom near you. Don't worry. But not today. Calais and that area of the French coast is very important. And so it's well, certainly today, for those of you who travel, you just hop on the channel, I guess, and cross over from England if you want to go that way. But basically, they're there. And so it's an Anglo-French marathon, sporting events, and all kinds of activities. You can see, I think you can see, Francis, see him over there, be your extreme right, that he would be there. And you say, can we do this again? Let's stay in touch. I don't think so. I mean, I think maybe this is one event. It's very exciting, and certainly it's come down for the fact, of course, of activities that seem more like 14th century than this later period, 16th century, because of they are having all kinds of fights with lances and, you know, all the rest of it. But very exciting. You say, maybe this is just a war break. You know, they're taking time out to get together before they get back to the real purpose of being kings, to go to war. And they will do that. So that is Francis, and that will be a major, shall we say, project for Cardinal Wolsey and King Henry. And then, of course, Charles V. This particular painting is when Charles V was 35. So he is definitely a grown man. And boy, does he love that dog. And we know about dogophilia. Yeah. Because there are some people here that are similar. But Charles, now we're not going to do trees, but I am going to point out to you, he has grandparents who are well known to you. Very well known. And I might add, they're not Baptists or Presbyterian. They are serious Catholics. Serious Catholic by the name of Ferdinand and Isabel. Now, you scholars remember before Christmas in 2025, unless you were cutting class, you remember well, not calling names, that the older daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella was in fact Juana, and she was the mother of Charles. And look at all that Charles is going to get. Lord have mercy. He'll be king of Spain. I love Spain. We all love Spain. Who wouldn't love Spain? Even those who took introductory to Spanish literature, you love Spain. I know. Maybe that was your foreign language. Yeah, Spanish 101. And then, in addition to Spain, how about being an emperor? Wasn't there that old song, I've got the world on a string? And you think Charles V has really got it on. I know, and looking good too, doesn't he? But I hesitate to mention this. You have to accept the bad with the good. Because Charles had problems, had a lot of problems. But before we think about that, I'd rather show you, not that we want to be greedy, but it's good to be emperor. You thought it was good to be king, but I think it's even better to be emperor. And I just started to think about, I guess it always looks better on a map than reality. But look at all of that, and all the different colors are just to show, I suppose, the acquisition. Let's just start out with the lime green, shall we? What I like about that is you say, oh, I love Brussels. I want my tulips. I want my windmills. Okay, let's not go 20th century on me, because here we are talking about territories that belong to King Charles. Why? Oh, the wonderful inheritance. His father, Juana's husband, he may not have been so much himself, but boy, did he have all kinds of lands, and they were all passed on to him. And look at all that, and go south. Gosh, don't we love Naples and all those territories? Yes, we never forget Spain. So we have all those lands, the Netherlands, and all the German lands. And you're thinking, this is all just wonderful. I agree. But the more you have, the more trouble you're going to have. And there was that little fellow named Martin Luther, who can be troubling. And let's go east. If you think we have people who are called Turks. You know, before I even say it, 1453. I know you. And 1517 coming. God, that mind. It just comes out. Because you think 1453, that's the fall of Constantinople to the Turks. And then 1517, the theses. And you say, those couldn't have been happy events for Charles V. No, he's got a lot of issues. I would say issues that, boy, they didn't have Dr. Freud around to talk to him, but he had a lot of problems, no doubt about it. And he was very concerned. Enough of that to make it obvious that he had an interesting relationship with Henry. Because, England's interesting. If you have the whole empire, I guess you're saying, well, Aunt Catherine, apparently, that is Catherine of Aragon. Aunt Catherine seems to like it. And I guess he knew some English. And of course, Catherine could revert back to Spanish anytime. So more or less, he had an interest in his aunt's situation. But I suspect that in addition to reunion concerns, he had an interest in what can this do with me in terms of people I'm really concerned about. A, the Turks, and I'm going to use a bad word, damnable Turks, plus those blankety blank French. Now, why don't we like the French? Well, sometimes you love them, sometimes you hate them. It's like they are competing in Italy and elsewhere. So it's always so much involved in terms of their relationships and in terms of how Wolsey, acting in Henry's supposed best interest, are going to try to manipulate this to the advantage of the Tudors, and not to mention himself. But yeah, he played the game of diplomacy. And also remember, when any time the Pope dies, we're all going to gather there, like they did for Leo, and start. I don't know, you wouldn't think of smoke-filled room. You think of, you think, I know. They probably, yeah. And they would have doing the Lord's work, but they were also thinking about what's in it for me. And obviously, Wolsey didn't come out particularly well in that way. But Charles V is a fascinating individual. He really is. I know many of you will get more excited about his son, Philip II, but, I think Charles V is very interesting too. And also, I want to note I always thought about Charles V and you say Holy Roman Emperor, and that makes you think of Germans. But here we have a guy who's really sort of half Spanish. And I think he's culturally more Spanish than he is. Like, based on the imperial position, this is no Hohenstaufen. Okay. So if you're thinking about them, we all love our Fredericks. But I think this got pretty oriented towards his Spanish heritage, and yet he has a lot to rule. And it's very, very difficult. So there are great problems there. And sometimes he'll say, Uncle Henry, I guess he called him Uncle Henry, I know you and Aunt Catherine, she speaks English so well. Y'all are so crazy about each other. They're kind of young there. Good to be young. Yeah, because they're thinking that that will change. But for the time being, we just make ourselves aware of both Francis and Charles. Because, the French and then the Empire and south of the border in Spain. So that's important in terms of English interests. I like this, although it came out a little blurry. 1530. And you say, gosh, Emperor and Pope, could you ask for anything more beautiful than that? My father, I love you so much. Oh, son, give me a big hug. And sometimes artwork can be deceiving. But it's very equestrian. For those of you who are horse lovers, they seem to be crazy about their horses. 1530. And I think, oh, Bologna. Those of you who've been there, it's a lovely place. The university's there, great law school. I'm not pitching any tourist trips right now. I thought it's interesting that that's where they chose to have the imperial coronation. And you're saying Clement VII. That rings such a bell. I know for some people like Eisenhower, we're talking about his presidency. And then many of us think of Clement VII, and we're thinking of the Medici family and all the rest of it. The truth of the matter is, he and Charles had certain problems. Well, I know fathers and sons have problems. I get that. But more than that, Charles had, shall we say, certain military exercises, to speak of it euphemistically, in Italy. And certain of his troops who were, I wouldn't say of the first order, decided to stop off in Rome and have a long weekend. And that was not good for the Roman citizens. This was in 1527. You don't need to know that date. Okay, let it go. I know you like to know it all, but just you can get overcrowded sometimes. 1527. And they really did it up, like let's party hardy. This isn't Fort Lauderdale or something. They were really doing it up in Rome. Very rude, especially if you're a Roman citizen. So all of this is to say, I'm sure Charles V was very embarrassed. I mean, you get some bill from the papal government saying all the destruction. It's like we are citizens and you shouldn't have been trashing all these places. All of this is to say that relations had not been warm between the Pope and the Emperor to be. Because that was, what, 2.5 years before 1527. And now we're going to have the coronation. I mean, you're a pope, what are you going to do? You're going to say, no, I want your bills paid. I don't see you on the ground begging. Clement VII isn't ready for that. He knows. He's not the brave. I hate to blame Clement. He was in a very difficult position. So I guess he thought, like many a pope has, oh, I'll crown him because they love that. And once I crown it, he'll go, grazie, grazie. Thank you, thank you. And then we'll all be amore, amore. It's all going to be wonderful. Well, it wasn't. But all you have to do is you get those two together and say, Turks, because, neither one, because that's a good thing, you don't like that one or that one. It's sort of like, what do we all have in common? We don't like the Turks, right? So just say that. So that's where the coronation will take place. So we now have an emperor. And as we have an emperor, we are in a position now to say that Clement has now crowned Charles. So they have more than a relationship. I mean, of course, popes come and go, don't they? I was president for 8 years. And a great military leader, President of Columbia University before that. All of this is to say that popes have usually a very short shelf life, in and out. And Clement is no different. But he will, for our purposes, play a very, very important role. And that, of course, has to do with Henry. Now you say, I know about Henry. He was a troublemaker. He is. Good, H-E-double-O. Not so much at this point. Henry loves the church loves him. All of this I think we need to be aware that the ideas that we think of in terms of the Protestant Reformation and the abuses that we associate with the church, I feel like Henry accepted all of that as just the way it was. I mean, look at Wolsey. Wolsey was a cardinal. He was Archbishop of York, and I don't know if he'd ever been there before. It's way up north. I mean, York is lovely. I mean, it's all that. But when you're a busy diplomat, you have shops to go to, and you have negotiations to make. You have time to go to cheap land, shall we call it? Yeah, a lot of bad around there. Forgive me. All of this is to say that Henry was, can we say, traditionalist? in terms of his religious practices. I mentioned to you his father and mother having masses offered for his brother. There's no reason why Henry would have followed any kind of practices or teachings that were not, quote unquote, traditional or orthodox, especially as you've heard me say it many times, I think 3 at least, 1517. Not that I want to make a fetish out of dates, but that's one of those biggies. I feel like you could go out tonight in College Street and say, what happened in 15th? They would all know about the 95 Theses if they'd had history and came to class. Unlike some offspring I know of, but
if they weren't on a football team,
calling names. Okay, now what about our greatest hits? I'm not saying you want to rush out to Amazon to get this. It could be rather heavy read. But if you have a night and you're not sleeping and you're thinking, I wonder what I don't want to take some of this. I want something that would help me rest. Maybe you could get a copy of this. This is Henry's greatest hits. It's called In Defense of the Seven Sacraments. Isn't that wild? I repeated here an ugly rumor that it was actually written by his buddy Thomas More. I don't know if that's true or not, because Henry was up on his theology and he was very much a traditionalist. For those of you who never studied or have forgotten, Luther got down basically to saying baptism and communion. And the other sacraments were for Luther superfluous. So the title of the work was a way to defend against the vile teachings of damnable one, Herr Luther, that monk gone astray. Why was he writing about Luther? Well, I think everybody was getting excited. I mean, it's like, it takes some time. I mean, they didn't have the internet then, but they had enough going on that I think Henry was well aware of it. And once it got, and maybe somebody shipped over from England to Italy, and a copy got to the papal area, which means Rome. The Pope said, I love this. This is great. And who was that Pope? I don't want to inundate you with too many names of popes, but this one you need to remember, Leo X. Now, guess who he was? And again, this is a tree thing, because we know that Medici tree. He was the uncle of Clement VII. Now, think about that, get that. And so the Medici, they had, what do we call it now? Resources. Yeah, resources right out of Florence. Beautiful Florence. We love Florence. And they had great banks. Imagine the Bank of Florence. Great assets. And so Leo, who was quite a patron of the arts, like popes were, and he was very, very appreciative. Oh, Henry, you said the nicest things. Because let me say, Leo was no fan of Luther. You know what he called Luther? Well, some words I won't use, but one word, bore. And I don't mean the kind of person you see at a party and you walk away from. I mean BOAR. As in, a wild boar has entered thy vineyard. And I'm quoting. What do we do when we get wild boars? I've never faced that problem in my animal husbandry experience, but I would assume I get out of the way if a boar comes. And also, you say, now look, boar, you better watch out. You're going down, man, because I have the forces of the Lord on my side. All right, so we think very little of that damnable Luther. And we have this bright young king writing what is going to be on top 10 list of favorite books. Amazon, Barnes and Noble, I don't know. But everybody's going to be rushing to get a copy. I don't know about that, but and it's in Latin, our beloved Latin. So everybody can read. Well, everybody that needs to. And Leo says, you know, I'd really like to do something to say a special grazie to my son. So you know what we're going to call him? Defender of the faith. And you know, Henry says, oh, shucks. Oh, sir, I really love you. Hug, hug, kiss, kiss. That's an amazing, you know, they try to take it back after they have a little, but guess what? The last time I looked, they're still using it. And I don't know. I think maybe they just tried to overlook that and say we love you anyway, but that's sort of modern. But Defender of the Faith comes from Leo X. You can use this at a social event. People will be very impressed that you know about this Medici Pope and the fact that he had such a concern. It's not, I don't know, when you're dealing with someone like Luther, I guess it is mighty nice to have a friend like that. Yeah. I mean, meanwhile, of course, you say, but Charles V, I mean, he's Spanish, super Catholic, hates church. I mean, what's there not to love? Well, remember that weekend in 1527, I mean, some serious vandalism. And so all of this means that this sort of Anglo-Papal love affair seems to be going strong at this particular point. Not saying it's going to last, I'm just saying, Defender of the Faith, we love you very much. And thank you for your support. Yeah. Oh, believe me, there were payments too. Believe me, I don't want you to think this is all freebie. It's got some cash. And then, of course, our special Aragonese lady. She had been Queen of England for some time. By this time, her parents, Ferdinand and Isabella, were long gone, and I assumed the sister, Juana, or she was indisposed at least. And meanwhile, Catherine had the one daughter, with the rest of the children not surviving. But there was one other child. As we said in the 60s, a love child. Yes. I guess it was love. Henry VIII had been messing around. Oh, I'm so surprised, say you. Well, we don't know how many special friends Henry VIII had. But we know about the mother here. That's not so important as realizing that having only one legitimate child, that is, Mary, meant that Henry would always be concerned about whether the family could survive. Yes, there had been, thinking of the daughter of King Henry I long ago. I know, a woman ruler. But the possible insecurity of this Tudor line meant that insofar as Henry VIII was concerned, with a middle-aged wife and the unlikelihood that an illegitimate son would gain acceptance, I've got problems. Oh, it's okay though. Wolsey will take care of it. He does everything. I love me some Wolsey. That's why I have him around. So there's Mary. And here's our boy. Long weekend. Yeah. Look at that.
Nice.
Yeah. And I've done up. And you say, Henry Fitzroy, that sounds nice. Yeah, I bet it does. That he was out and proud. I mean, it's not at all like, oh, I'm illegitimate. I'm worried about my image. No, he wasn't worried at all. My dad's the king. What do you think about that, loser? I mean, yeah, Henry was really, really an interesting fellow. What a pity he had to die young, but he would have been, I don't know. You know, you think William the Conqueror was illegitimate. It happens. One of the great modern events of history. Yeah, but that's Henry Fitzroy, and he was, until change comes about, he was going to be the potential heir. I don't know. Maybe, because they had a process, you know, we always do, legitimization. Yeah. I know he was a boo-boo, but I know, but parents love him very much. So, and so does God. So let's all just get behind it. There will be a love offering expected. There's a service charge.
That's right.
You know, we have inflation. So we need an offering will be very, very appreciated.
Yeah.
So that's how we find that maybe there was a possibility that Mary could be superseded. Although I'm not sure we know what Catherine would have think about that. But also I'm not sure whether Henry cared. They had been very happy despite his infidelities. the old double standard, I think, is definitely in play here. But she seemed to accept that side of her husband with, shall we say, great acceptance. I mean, again, remember who her parents were. So, I mean, if you're brought up in those traditional terms, I guess she accepted her husband had these little boo-boos, and let's just move on. Just glad to be part of the Tudor family, and just love you. So there was Mary, and she and her mother were, not surprisingly, very close. But when it gets right there at the court, that gets a little annoying. And one of these people, who was a member of a very, very prominent family, I would call them people of the court, movers and shakers. The father was named Thomas Boleyn. And the woman you see here, Mary, was, I guess, a character. You've probably read novels about her. She was very, well, I know you have. Yeah, I wasn't, yeah, that goes without saying. But Mary Boleyn, she'd been around the track. She had definitely messed around. You can just imagine what Catherine of Aragon thought about people of that ilk. But she was her father's daughter, player. I mean, it's like she was involved in the whole scene. And I see this as much as trying to get influence and power as I do about, something lascivious. I hate to be that way, but I did see a lot of it in terms of power. Well, again, Henry VIII, he goes on and then says, this has been wonderful. It's not you, it's me. Those kinds of things. I'm not sure how Henry decided to get rid of her, but it's been real. I've really enjoyed this. I'll never forget those special times, all of the above. But it's over. And of course, being part of that family, I don't think she had any trouble having a husband and moving on. But would we ever think about Mary if it weren't for the kid sister? I don't know. That, of course, being, look at the necklace, Anne Boleyn. I was looking at some photographs of their home. And Lord, those British are as good as Americans. I mean, about selling T-shirts and mugs, everything you can think of, dolls. And, in my day, mugs, postcards, they don't give all that. But now, you would not believe all the, I don't want to collect trash. I'll just say interesting items to be stored away, put in your attic or wherever you put stuff that you no longer need. But that's Anne Boleyn, and that's their father, Thomas Boleyn. And I think there's a special place in the bad place for people who exploit their children this way, because that was their purpose, and seems to have been far more studious. She'd spent a lot of time in France. A lot of people, when you see the movies, sometimes you think, oh, she was just a mischievous flirt and that was all there was, but that's not really true. She had an outstanding education and been very, very involved in learning before she became one of Catherine's maids of honor. Big mistake. Because, of course, and here's Hever Castle. And y'all, I just loved it. The Astors restored it in the 20th century. We love American money. And I don't know, when you go into it, you do feel like you're in something Art Deco, that sort of stuff. It's right outside London. And your t-shirts, your mugs, whatever you want to throw away money on. Not being critical, but all of that would be part of this area. So these Boleyn folks had a nice home, and she had a brother, George, who will be important in our story later. And the Boleyns were riding high because they were floating around Henry VIII and looking forward to new opportunities. And you know the story. Henry sees Anne and says, it was an old song. It started, I think I love you. Yes, I think you could sing that, or maybe you do in the shower. But all of this is to say that Anne says the very improbable, and I'm very fond of you too, but it's too soon. Let's just be together and enjoy our company, and maybe we can do Latin lessons together, conjugate verbs in the subjunctive. And his interests, surprise, surprise, are more carnal. And what's going to happen? Well, please come back next week, and there we will. So, thank y'all. Appreciate it. Look forward to seeing you next time.